us. For those of you who haven't been to a house debate yet, the format of the debate goes that a proposition speaker will be followed by an opposition speaker and so on until we get to the end. Then we'll open the floor for audience questions at the end of the debate. Speeches are 7 minutes in length, so after the first minute you'll hear a clap, at which point anybody on the floor is allowed to offer questions. And those speakers are allowed to accept or reject those questions. Please respect the speaker's wishes, but please also get involved. And feel free to ask questions, feel free to get involved in the debate, that's absolutely fine, and we encourage you to do that. When the speech reaches 6 minutes, you'll hear another clap, at which point you can no longer offer questions, and the speakers have a minute. At 7 minutes, they'll hear a double clap, at which point they should wrap up their speeches. It doesn't mean they have to speak for 7 minutes, that's just the structure of the debate, and that's just so none of you are confused. So without further ado, I'd like to call on Eric Espejo to open the case for the proposition.
I know what everyone's thinking already. Can't believe Jesus is an atheist. Regardless, as an atheist, this notion is a bit tricky to discuss. First thing I thought was, how can I argue God's evil if I don't even believe that any God exists for that matter? I thought to myself, how am I going to tiptoe my way around this debate? Maybe I can work it as the God presented in the Bible, the Quran, the Torah is an evil, pernicious, malevolent character. I thought that was a bit too easy to do. So instead, what I'm going to try to do is avoid the all too prevalent argumentum ad passiones, or appeal to emotions, as much as I possibly can. In this, I'm going to be avoiding the God of classical monotheism, so the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, they're not going to be referenced at all. Instead, I'm going to start by posing this question. What does it mean to be good or to be evil? Is evil merely the absence of good, as dark as the absence of light, or cold as the absence of heat? My definition of goodness goes as follows. I'll stick to this definition throughout. My definition is good is to maximize well-being and to minimize suffering. Now I'll ask another question. What reason do we have to think that if a God exists, that this entity is significantly more inclined to goodness rather than evil? Neither the teleological, or the argument from design, nor the cosmological argument, or the argument from universal causation, that the universe has a beginning and that the cause of it must be a God, can relate any sort of moral makeup of a divine creator. I must warn that this will not be an attempt to prove that God is evil, or that there exists any evil deity for that matter, for as I said, I don't believe that a God exists. However, this will be an attempt to show that within the frameworks of the arguments made for a God, both propositions are of equal worth and weight. I'm going to pose my main point right now. If the problem of evil does not dismiss the notion of an omnibenevolent God, then why should the problem of good dismiss the notion of an omnimalevolent God? Both are equally compatible within the current justifications of a divine entity. So let me explain. The logical formula for the problem of evil goes as follows. Point 1, there exists an all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, all-good God. Point 2, evil and suffering exist. Point 2 is true, therefore point 1 must be false. On the other hand, the problem of good would state, point 1, there exists an all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, all-evil God. Point 2, good exists. Point 2 is true, therefore point 1 must be false. Keep these ideas in mind. The explanations to the problem of evil, known as theodicies, if free will would be an example of a theodicy, does indeed give viable and reasonable explanations for the existence of suffering, pain, evil, death, etc. However, most of these can only take into consideration human-caused evils and not what we would call a natural evil, like a baby deer getting trapped in a forest fire and ultimately suffering until it dies. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, why would he allow or inflict so much wanton destruction and suffering onto his creation? Often this problem is answered with God works in mysterious ways. This assertion is fallacious at best. Non scio ergo Deum. I don't know, therefore God. I asked you to keep in mind my two main points, the problem of evil and the problem of good, so I hope that you did. Just as these theodicies gave explanations refuting the problem of evil, the same thing can be done in a mirror fashion against the evidentiary problem of good, which can be called reverse theodicies. Take this for example. An all-evil creator gave those he created the free will to do good unto others, even though that goes against his divine evil plan. An all-evil God created human beings with the proverbial strings attached as if we were puppets, adherence to his every despicable command. However, to maximize moral depravity and evil, the creator would rather have us perform these atrocities on our own accord, just as an all-good God would rather us perform good deeds on our own accord. For you cannot have one form without the other. Just as you need evil to have good and good to have evil, this theodicy, known as the contrast theodicy, works equally well for both scenarios. Another theodicy, which can be called the character-building solution, can just as easily be paired with a mere character-destroying solution. So often you hear theists say, God never gives you what you can't bear. That's just erroneous. People die from what they can't handle all the time. The idea follows that people, through their suffering and play, may come out stronger than they had before they started. Equally, an evil God may give us perfect health, beauty, beautiful skin, clever mind, only for it to be stripped of us as the years go on, causing a far higher degree of nostalgic suffering, if you will, a yearning for the past. An evil God gives us loving and caring parents, only for the children to have to watch those parents grow old and to eventually die outside of their own control. To have had such a beautiful thing in the beginning, only for it to be taken away, can be argued as more evil than to have never had it in the first place. For these reasons, it can be determined that both ideas, presented within the arguments for the existence of a creator, are both equally compatible. If these reverse theodicies are not enough on their own to convince, then the fallacious God did it argument would certainly work in a reverse manner as well. Simply, we cannot explain all the good in the world, or why such an evil God would allow us so much happiness and good to exist. However, God does work in mysterious ways. To consolidate my main point, any evidence used for refuting the problem of evil and of an all-good God can in return be reversed and used symmetrically in refuting the problem of good and an all-evil God. Therefore, it must be determined that an omnibenevolent and an omnimalevolent God are two equally substantiated claims in the arguments for the existence of a God. Thank you.
I've got some good news for all of you. God isn't actually evil. I'm sure you're probably a bit worried for a second there. Wake up in the morning. No, but this is kind of a serious subject as well. Let me tell you a quick story. There was a girl who was in Ireland for a little while during the last year. I knew her, she was French. And basically, we got talking about religion, and she said, "Oh, I wish I had your faith, but I can't." And I said, "Well, why not?" And we got talking, and basically, she said, she told me the story of someone that she knew very, very well. This woman, she was a mother of 3 children. Her husband had committed suicide, and she was diagnosed with cancer. And she had, I think, if I recall correctly, she'd struggled a long time with that, and she tried to get together as much money as she could to try and pay for the treatment. But after the treatment, the cancer was still there. And this girl told me that how every morning this mother gets up and with a smile on her face despite all of the suffering, so that she can, get her 3 children ready for school and still try to be a good mother for them. So this is something that affects us all really, really deeply and really closely, because we all have either suffered ourselves, or we know someone we love dearly who has suffered as well. And we ask, why they don't deserve that? How can a good God allow this? So we're talking basically about the problem of evil, and I'm going to just quickly reformulate what Eric said in his speech. The problem of evil is basically that if there is evil, then there cannot be an all-good God, because an all-good God would prevent all evil. That's essentially what it is. Well, what's my argument? I'm hoping to turn that on its head by saying that by starting, so Eric's assumption in that argument is that there can't be any explanation for evil. That's kind of a hidden assumption in the whole thing. I'm going to kind of turn that on its head and start by trying to establish that there is a good God. And from that follows the inevitable conclusion that there must be an explanation for evil. I'm going to try and give some examples of what that explanation might be. So my argument is going to be try and show you that there is a God, try and show you that he is good, and then try and offer some examples of what that explanation of evil and suffering might be in the world. But first of all, I'm going to try and do this as quickly as possible, that there is a God. So, believe it or not, science actually points to the existence of a God. But that's an audacious claim, but it's true. So I'm going to just quickly formulate the cosmological argument here, which goes something like this. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And I'm going to just quickly explain why that cause must necessarily be God. First of all, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, nothing can just come out of nothing. That's impossible. No, thank you. Nothing can, so something that doesn't exist can't just bring itself into existence because it's nothingness, it doesn't have any potential as you do that. Nothing can bring itself out of existence. So if something began to exist, it must have had a cause. The universe began to exist. This is what science points us towards. You've got the Big Bang Theory. Some people would say that the universe has existed, is eternally old. But that's been refuted by modern physics in a paper. For example, the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin paper literally says that there is no escape from the fact of a cosmological beginning, that the universe did in fact begin at some point. So why is this God? Well, by universe I mean all of space and time and matter. The creator of all of space and time and matter must necessarily not be contained within the category of time. He must not be contained within space, and he couldn't be contained within the category of matter, being the one who creates all of these things. So I know this is a very brief way of explaining this. So I'm not going to spend any longer on it because I'd be all day doing it. There's also a series of coincidences, I suppose. They're called anthropic coincidences that make life possible in the universe, without which life would not be possible in the universe. For example, protons and neutrons. A neutron is slightly heavier than a proton. If that was any different, if protons were slightly heavier than neutrons, there would be only hydrogen in the entire universe, and that would mean there's no possibility for life. If neutrons were slightly heavier than protons, or slightly more heavy than they already are, there would be no hydrogen in the universe. So either nothing but hydrogen or no hydrogen in the universe, and both of those things would make life very impossible. There's other examples of that, but I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move on. Hopefully I've made a good case. No, thank you. Hopefully I've made a somewhat good case for saying why God does exist, because all of these coincidences, these aspects of physics that don't have to be, that make life possible, they all are. They don't have to align with each other to make life possible. If even one of them was different, no life would be possible at all in the universe. This seems to naturally lend itself to a religious interpretation. So my second thing I want to establish is God is good. Now I'm going to have to deviate from my original argument just a little bit to deal with some of Eric's points. Well, my first point it would be to say, well, look around you. There's a lot of good that is in the world. There's music, there's beauty, there's other people, there's friendship, there's enjoyment. There's a lot of good things in life that we're able to enjoy. And I'd also say, look at some other good people in the past as well, especially people who have claimed to be closest to God, have done some great things in the past. I want to there's too many of them to count, and I'm sure there's lots of them whose stories aren't known. But one example would be the story of Maximilian Kolbe, who in Auschwitz, when a father of a family was going to be put into a pit and starved to death, Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward and said, "I'm a Catholic priest, let me take his place." That was an act of pure self-giving, of pure self-sacrifice for someone he didn't know at all. And he starved to death, I think it was with 10 other people in that pit, and he helped comfort each one of them until they died, and he was the last one to die himself then. So I say there's a lot of good in the world, and since goodness, well, I've made the case already that if God did create all the world, if there is goodness in the world, then that goodness did come from Him. Now, I'm going to have to get a little more philosophical as well, because let's just leave it there, very kind of touch on that point. If God was evil, well, couldn't things be a whole lot worse than they are at the moment? I mean, couldn't we live in some kind of torture world of endless suffering and pain? Faced with that prospect of an evil God, your life is actually pretty good in comparison to what the possibilities are. And there's a lot of things to live for. So hopefully I've kind of somewhat established there's a philosophical point of what is goodness, and goodness is an objective thing, and evil is just a lack of goodness, and that therefore goodness must come from God, therefore God is good. But I can't really get into that very much at the moment because I'm running out of time, as you can see. So I'll try and get on to my very last point. Well, so if we could establish the existence of a good God, then it must follow that there must be some kind of explanation for suffering. And I'm going to try and suggest what that might be, because it's not such a far-fetched thing. I'm going to try and dismantle the assumption on the proposition side that there can be no explanation for suffering, that suffering can never end up resulting in a greater good than things were beforehand. My aunt was diagnosed with cancer about 2 years ago. That's not fun. She had to get treated with chemotherapy. That's not very fun either. All her hair fell out. She felt sick basically all the time. It's pretty agonizing and excruciating. But she stuck through it, and because of the chemotherapy, she went into remission. Her cancer went into remission, and now she's complete. She's like a new person almost. She's completely into exercising. She's also got the whole family to start going to the gym. All of her sisters in their 50s. They're all going to the gym, they're all concerned about their health now. She's got a new lease on life. She almost appreciates life even more now because of how close she came to losing it. This is something that's been empirically reported by psychologists. It's called adversarial growth. It's when there's a turning point in someone's character which is caused by adversity, which is caused by suffering, and the people are like a whole new person afterwards. Their lives improve exponentially because of that suffering. And look at your own lives, you can see that this is true as well. Is there anything really good and worthwhile that any of you have in your own lives that you do not get by having some kind of struggle or suffering for it? I think the answer is no. As they say, no pain, no gain. But you know, what about the cases where we can't see any? There doesn't seem to be any explanation at all. So situations like what Stephen Fry says. You know, if I ever meet God, I'd say, how dare you? What about 3-year-old children with bone cancer? How can you justify that? That's a good question. But I'd say to that, look at it like this. We assume that we would know how an infinitely good God would act. So so think of it this way. If a child was being brought for a vaccination by their parents, from the child's point of view, like, you know, why are my parents doing this to me? It's making me suffer. They're making me go into this scary place and get stuck needles in me. It seems terrible. But of course, we know, we get it. We see that this small amount of suffering is saving that child down in the long run from a far worse amount of suffering from disease and sickness. And that's what it's like for us as well, because if we're talking about an infinite God, we can't assume to know how that God would act, even if that God is acting for our good. I finish with this. So, Stephen Fry talks about the child with bone cancer, and, you know, how dare you? He says, if I ever meet God, how dare you? I was going to ask, what is Stephen Fry offering people like that? Because from the atheistic perspective, and I know they're not as rude to say this, but from the atheistic point of view, or even from a God is evil point of view, you can't offer any hope for someone in that situation. You must necessarily say, if you can't observe any kind of goodness or purpose or meaning for your suffering, then there is none. Your suffering is meaningless and it's hopeless. You know, what do you say to the child with bone cancer? What do you say to that mother with the 3 children who has cancer? We say, there is hope, and that hope is well-founded. Thank you.
What he said at the end. He said at the end.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by just telling you why what Jason said is probably wrong. So he starts off by telling us that God is existing, by telling that's flawed because it would mean God himself had to be created by something, which doesn't make much sense. But I'm not here to dispute that, because for the debate to happen, we have to just believe that God exists. We have to take him at his best, that he's real. Okay. He then goes on to explain to us that there are lots of good people. I tell you, there are also lots of really awful people. I'd say the people who are really awful, the people who are really good, are in the middle of the world. Most of us are just kind of mediocre. We're just kind of alright people. Like, I know, like, this sounds really awful, but how many of us are going to save millions of lives? And I know that, like, the little things matter, but also the amount of people who are bad in the world, we take only the bad people as the people who have killed hundreds. So surely to God we should take the amount of good people as the people who only saved hundreds. It doesn't make much sense on that front. He also tells us that life could be a lot worse. I think that life could be a lot worse, but I tell you, life can be a lot better. My life could be better if I didn't have to look at the news and see that millions of children are being bombed in Syria. The world could be a lot better if the world wasn't actually dying in front of my eyes. The world could be a lot better if even my own friends' personal lives wasn't as bad as it is. So, like, that doesn't really make enough sense to me for me to have that as an argument. I can't see how it makes sense.
Question.
Yeah, go for it.
If you're saying that God is evil, but the situations that you brought up are brought up because of other people in the world and not God.
I'm going to
so, like, wars aren't God, it's people on earth.
I'm going to explain that when I get out of the bubble. Don't worry. So Jason tells us that we can't just tells us that these things are character building, and it makes me appreciate life more. anymore. But I can tell you, it's funny that a lot of people who have an awful childhood, people whose parents didn't appreciate them as much as our children in Syria will appreciate life much more now that their village has been bombed. They can see that life is great. I don't think that makes much sense to me. Like, I don't understand how negative experience makes your good ones better. Surely to God, life would just be alright if it wasn't awful all the time. He tells us it's for the good, we just can't understand it, and uses the explanation of the vaccines. But why doesn't God let us understand it? At least someone understands it in the vaccine situation. No one on this earth really understands it truly. And if God was actually not as bad as he seemed, he'd probably tell us. Okay, now on to my main perspective. So we must understand for this debate to work, we have to understand that good and evil aren't completely opposite scales. Most people in this room are evil, but also really good on the same scale. So we must see, is God better or worse? And if he's good, he's probably not evil, and if he's worse, he's probably evil. Okay, so I have 3 main points. The way we appreciate God through most organised religion is so oppressive to most people. And there are 2 explanations for that. God has told people who are oppressing other people to oppress them, pretty shit. Or God has created evil people who now have the power and corruption to oppress people, also pretty shit. Or then my second point is, God has caused harm to many people through natural disasters. Okay, so let's just talk about how God wants praise and thanks. God asks me every day to pray whenever anything significant happens. Most religions would encourage in the beginning to pray in the morning, to pray when you eat, and to pray when you sleep. That's what most religions and organised religions ask for. God, who is supposedly in a fatherly figure in most religions, tells us we have to thank him every time I do anything. I have to thank God for anything I've ever done in my life, because none of it is my merit. God tells us that when we go to sleep, we must thank him for the wonderful day we've had, no matter how shite my day was. So it's instilled this doesn't even make any sense, because no one actually does it, because most people don't actually do it because they actually aren't thankful. Most people do it because fear is instilled into them that if they don't, they burn in hell forever. That's a pretty evil concept to begin with. If anyone in this world, and as God is forgiving and sees that he says, oh look, listen, they're going to hell, or even less worse, they're going to purgatory. Purgatory is also a pretty awful place to be. It's cruel for God to demand this of us. It's cruel for God to threaten his children with a punishment so severe that an everlasting hell. It's cruel for God to demand from us when he knows and understands us so much. He knows that we are inferior to him, yet he still demands so much of us. Even when God knows how inferior we are, he still punished us for supposedly Adam and Eve when we were they were starving and they stole an apple. I think that's an analogy for sex or whatever. But basically Adam was mad, Eve was mad starving and took an apple and then were paying for it for millions of years to come. That's a pretty shite analogy. Imagine I was I used to be mad when we were a child because I'm fat, that's just the way it is. I raw food out of press. Imagine every time I robbed food out of my mouth press, she went to the neighbour and was that little child there, bone cancer. That little child there, natural disaster. We all have an AIDS soon. It's pretty screwed in my opinion. Anyways, I'm sorry for my ancestors' sins that probably didn't exist, but I don't think the whole world deserves to punish. We've suffered enough with our one mistake, and there's no reason for this to happen. Even though Jason says it makes us appreciate the good more, it doesn't make sense in my head. It just. Also, God is as wise as we believe him to be, and is all-seeing, and he would understand my capability as a human to be an absolute wanker. If God was as lovely and as kind as he was, he would know that I can say things that can ruin a friend's life. He would know that I have the capability as a person to start a war. He would know that people have the capability to be corrupt when they have power. And I tell you, if he really did care, he would never have created people like this. You can say that this happens because of nurture, but God has created the environment in which we're nurtured. You can say that this is because of nature, but God created the genes that we have, if God is what we seem to be. God isn't as cool as we know him to be, as cool as my nan was frightened into believing he is. He's just not that great if this is the world we live in. If I want to say my first point is unrelated to God because humans are the ones who enforce the religion, if I want to say that the church or any organised religion isn't God, then they have to understand that God created those people. So in a way, every person is God, because that's the way this debate plays out. There is no way on earth that he can't be. Did you have a question? Yeah, go.
I was just saying that we are inferior to God, and he expects so much of us through prayer. But then again, he blesses us so much with food, shelter, and a lot of things.
That's great. He doesn't bless everyone in the world with shelter. He doesn't bless everyone in the world with food. He blesses some of us who are privileged enough to be greedy to rob them of that. So like, it doesn't really make much sense. Like it just doesn't make sense, because we in this room are blessed. We in this room can appreciate lots of luxuries in life, but not everyone in the world has it. If God was as great as he really was, he would understand that everyone needs it, and he would understand a human's capability to take that away from other people, and he would have measures in place to stop that happening. But he just doesn't. So I beg you to propose.
What was that? See, that's tired.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott. I'm, contrary to popular belief, the chaplain in the student centre. I've had some interesting moments with that recently. Parked yesterday outside the chaplaincy, got a note on my car saying, "Don't park here anymore." Was chatting to someone. I got clamped outside the church. No one believes my car belongs to a chaplain. And then last week, or 2 weeks ago, I was in church and I was chatting to a guy. I was like, "Yeah, I'm the student in UCD." And he worked. I'm the chaplain in UCD. One of the chaplains in UCD. He said to me, "Oh, I remember when we had real chaplains in UCD." You scumbag. But I understand at the same time, like, let's face it, to paraphrase Pete Holmes, if there is a multiverse and multiple realities, this is the only one in which I'm not a tattoo-covered barista on Instagram. The motion for our debate tonight is kind of a strange one, and it's fascinating because it presupposes at the very least the possibility of the existence of God. And there's a huge burden of proof on the proposition to define evil and argue that God fits into that category. And it's a tough one to argue the flaws of a being that you actively do not believe in. Happened every time, I should have known it. On the other hand, I struggle with it because it kind of feels also like my job isn't the balance tonight. Like, if I don't get this right, what am I doing with this job? For some of us, this is an interesting mental exercise, and for others, it's a conversation about the foundation upon which we base our lives. As a result, it's been hard to know how to approach it. I'm in two minds. Do I speak to your heads or to your hearts? Is this a purely intellectual matter? Then logic is the best weapon. And I can argue, as the classical theologians would have, that if we assume that there is a God, which the motion does, and he created the world, then the definition of good and evil rests with him, not with us. And therefore, this God can only be good, even if we do not recognize that to be goodness. There's two problems with this. The first is, it leaves me cold. And the second is, this kind of purely objective intellectual discussion of God has absolutely nothing to do with why I'm a person of faith. For me, my faith has never been a matter of the head, it's always been a matter of the heart. I'm not a Christian because I objectively weighed up the reasons for and against God. I never aspired to be religious, which is a really loaded word that often doesn't mean the same thing to me that it does to others. When choosing things for my life to include, I didn't click the box religious and then go to the drop-down menu and pick Christian. It makes this hard to debate because it's less something that I shout from the rooftops, and it's more something that I whisper to myself on the dark nights of the soul. And this life has some luck. For me, my faith is an answer to the question, what does it mean to be human? And for me, it means to be made in the image of God. Well, then what is God like? As the writer, one of my favorite writers, Brian Zahn, says, he says this constantly, God is like Jesus, and Jesus is what God is like. And if Jesus is what God is like, the reason I'm a Christian is because I'm absolutely captivated and fascinated by the person of Jesus. The proposition is argued that we look at the suffering, that we should look at the suffering of the world. And they're right. In my spiritual direction with people, I often say to them, if you have never doubted God, then you either underestimate the amount of pain this world is in, or you don't care. I remember hearing a brilliant story recently. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Isn't it not just about hope? Like, yeah, it is really nice to believe in a God, and nice to believe it's not evil, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
If I stopped here, it probably wouldn't. But I'm going to take it on for what it means to me. I remember hearing a story a few years ago about a father who said to his son, when you finish school, I will take, he said to all his kids, when you graduate, we're going to take you on a trip, take you around the world. And his youngest son said, I want to go to Europe, I want to tour around Europe. And he told the story of his father taking him to Europe and them showing up at Auschwitz and going through the tour and understanding the history. And his dad turning to him at the end and said, anything that you say about God has to make sense when you're standing here. And that's the challenge of our language. It's the challenge that, to be honest, a lot of things don't make sense in that space. But for me, what my faith is teaching me about the response to suffering is embodied in Jesus. In one of my favorite passages in John 11, Jesus comes, he shows up late, and sometimes it can feel like God is late. And he shows up late, and his friend Lazarus has died, and his two sisters are there. They both turn to him with the same question, the same accusation, really. They say to him, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. And they're right. And he doesn't tell them how their story's going to end, and eventually he goes on, at least according to the story, depending on what you believe, he goes on to raise Lazarus from the dead. But in that moment, he enters into their pain and he weeps alongside them. And for me, that's what I'm learning, is that there is no good answer to suffering, because that's what the question about this is. It's a question of how we respond to it. On the cross, Jesus cries out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And this for me is what makes me so fascinated with this character of Jesus, who God is like. He enters into our pain, our brokenness, our heartbreak, and that deep dreaded sense of the absence of God. Before he dies, he looks around at those who killed him and he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He does not look at us in angry judgment, but in gracious compassion, because he understands how hard this life is to live and how hard it is to figure it out. This is the God that I believe in, and I believe that it's the God who Christianity proclaims. And when I was younger, when I was growing up, I always really struggled with this question. I always kind of believed in God in kind of a kind of traditional, abstract way, but I always doubted whether or not he was good. These days, I find that the conversation has changed. I now always believe that God is good. But there are some days it's harder than others to believe that he's real.
God actually exists, but I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, it's perfectly clear to me that any God that does exist must be absolutely evil. Now, strictly speaking, before concluding that, what I should really do is make sure I know which God I'm talking about. So, for example, there are some people who believe in a God that is fallible. And in that case, the creation of, say, deadly volcanoes that have caused so much needless suffering in the world could be attributed to merely a divine mistake. So such a God would then clearly not be evil, he would just be an incompetent moron. But in order to address the issue, I think what I'll do is try and make the case that Jesus Christ is absolutely evil. Not least because he appears to be with us this evening. Don't worry, I'll do almost all of my arguments relate to almost every God, and certainly every flavour of the Abrahamic gods. So, Jesus Christ is absolutely evil in both word and deed. And in his own words, Jesus promised John of Patmos that he would kill the children of Jezebel for the sins of their mother. Now, murdering innocent children is obviously evil. In fact, the punishment of children for the sins of their parents is a recurring motif in the Christian story. Depending on his mood, the Christian God promises to continue this practice through either the third or the fourth generation. If I began murdering the people in this room for the sins committed by your great-grandparents in the 19th century, would you think I was evil? I certainly hope so. Many Christians are surprised when they read the words of Jesus about murdering innocent children. In this country, the religion curriculum taught in schools is almost exclusively Christian, but somehow they manage to leave out the various admonishments that Jesus issues for the murder of children. Many Christians prefer to believe that Yahweh may have become a little carried away with all of the smiting in the Old Testament, but the New Testament was when Jesus, meek and mild, convinced his curmudgeonly father to calm down a bit. This view of Jesus as a character that is detached from the Old Testament is absolute nonsense. The triune God of Christianity does not depict Jesus as a character that is entirely independent from Yahweh. Christianity even invented a word for this. We're told that Jesus is consubstantial with the Father. So whenever God decided to drown the entire world, with the exception of one lucky Ark-resident family, Jesus did that. So Jesus is therefore not merely evil. He is in fact a genocidal monster who murdered more people more quickly than Hitler, Stalin and Mao combined. Furthermore, when he had the opportunity to distance himself from the evil of the Old Testament, Jesus instead enthusiastically endorsed it. In fact, he insisted that not one letter should be changed from all of those Old Testament laws. So Jesus is especially keen to ensure that any woman who is not a virgin on her wedding night should be stoned to death on her father's doorstep. Yes?
This is speaking about an organized religion that humans wrote the book for, but is that not like, I don't think that's really what the opposition are trying to defend. I think they're just defending the notion of a God who created this world.
What I'm arguing is that Jesus Christ specifically is obviously evil, and I want to come on to explain why that extends to any creator God. So if the second coming of Christ occurs in the next 5 minutes, and you find Jesus Christ here arguing that women should be stoned to death for premarital sex, do you think Jesus would be evil? I certainly hope so.
Point of information: doesn't Jesus specifically stop one from being stoned to death in the New Testament?
I think that Jesus is both in favour and against stoning people to death, but it doesn't seem to get But it gets worse. It gets worse because Jesus offers his own novel and original evil words to add to those in the Old Testament. In the parable of the weeds, Jesus talks about a farmer separating weeds from his crop in order to burn them. Subsequently, he is invited to explain the meaning of this parable. In the elucidation, Jesus departs from the allegorical language of metaphor, and instead he offers an explicit prophecy. And his prophecy explains that the parable is about his own second coming, and he promises that he will burn sinners in a furnace of fire where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, I think we can all agree today that when ISIS burns people alive, that is wrong. In fact, I think everyone here today can agree that no matter what transgressions the unfortunate victim may or may not have been guilty of, when ISIS burns people alive, that is always evil. So here we have a specific case when we can measure empirically exactly how evil Jesus is, and we can compare that to the behaviour of ISIS. So when ISIS immolates people, they only do it for the short time that it takes their victim to expire. Jesus makes the extra effort to ensure that he immolates people in conscious torment and fire for all eternity. So objectively and empirically speaking, Jesus is infinitely more evil than ISIS. So I would submit to you that an empirical measurement of God as being infinitely more evil than ISIS at their worst should be able to persuade this house that God is evil. But even without Jesus explaining his own evil nature in his own words, we can see his evil all around us in his deeds. Mexico is a Christian country. When the recent awful earthquake began to shake that region, there is little doubt that some number of innocent children began praying to Jesus to be saved. Now, just picture that scene for a moment. We have an innocent little girl who has spent the entirety of her short life diligently following the instructions of her parish priest. The earthquake is a feature of the world that Jesus has fabricated, and when it begins, the little girl prays to Jesus to be saved from the earthquake of his creation. Jesus listens carefully to the prayers, And for some number of children, he decides that they should die slowly, in darkness, in terror, and in agony. This is the purest possible evil we can imagine. We cannot imagine a more pure evil than that. So, these very obvious evils that we observe all around us in the world today indict all variations of the Abrahamic God and all other creator gods.
Just on the topic of natural disasters, like obviously it's like quite a interesting topic in this debate, but since we've proven that natural disasters are proven by, or caused by science and geology and stuff, isn't it a bit strange to kind of blame God for those when science proves it away?
Yeah, so I think natural events do have natural causes, and it's the religious who need to explain how they propose a creator God created the universe that includes these natural disasters without being evil. Scientists don't have to explain good or evil. No scientist ever proposed that earthquakes are good or evil. It's the religious who propose that a good God created the universe that includes all of this evil in it. So it's the onus is on the religious to explain how that evil can come about without an evil God.
So an issue that's proposing that God caused it, the religious people aren't proposing that God decided like a couple of weeks ago, oh yeah, I think we should have an earthquake in Mexico. It's because of...
Sorry, you're out of order. Sorry, you can ask the questions after. Sorry.
I'll just answer very briefly. Irrespective, even if I grant you that the earthquake was not caused by God, God has the ability to save whoever he wants. If a 2-year-old child is drowning in a foot of water beside me, and I neglect to save the child, you wouldn't say I am therefore not evil because I didn't push the child into the water. God is perfectly capable of saving the children. He listens to their prayers, and he decides the best thing to do is for those children to die in terror and in agony. And that indicts God as evil.
Ladies and gentlemen, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond all measure. Ladies and gentlemen, Literary and Historical Society, Fáilte, how are you all doing? There's no microphone. I don't really know what to do with my hands. I'll try to keep it quite normal. My name is Kenneth. I'm here to speak on the opposition of this motion, because let's be honest, if God really was evil, I'm going to speak on the side that is less likely to get smoked, or smitten, or smited. Doesn't matter. First off, I'm not going to defend the Bible. I'm not going to defend the Bible for one very simple reason. I have never played a game of Chinese Whispers where the same message from the start got all the way to the end. So I don't think a game of Chinese Whispers that went on for 2,000 years is something I need to defend. I don't really place much emphasis on the Bible, so I'm always going to take a general view of God, kind of the same as, I forget his name, Jesus. So, first off, this is actually answering exactly what Jesus talked about. So God is all powerful, and he's all-seeing, he's the creator of the universe, and apparently he is evil. Well, I've got to be honest, like, I've had a pretty reasonable day. You know, I got out of my last lecture early, I found 2 quid in the ground, and I got Spider-Man on my socks. Like it's nice for me. Now, if you're right in saying that God is evil, like, he's just not very good at it. An all-powerful evil being wouldn't allow these things. Now, Like, honestly, if I was all-powerful and evil, I would turn off orgasms. Why not? Suddenly, every guy in the room will know what it feels like. Will know what his girlfriend feels like after absolutely nothing. Or I'd make one of your socks permanently wet. I don't know, literally anything. That's what you can do when you're all powerful and evil. But this doesn't happen. We live in a world where happiness is possible. Now we hear the answer for this being that if there's a reason for this evil, for this good to happen, and you're an evil God, it's fine. And the reason that we're given is that, if you have something good that's taken away from you, that's eviler than anything you can possibly come up with. I just frankly disagree with this. I think pure torture for eternity is probably far, far worse than having a nice while and then torture for eternity. It doesn't make sense that taking that away is somehow worse. If anything, that's just like a failure of imagination to see how painful things can actually be. No thank you. So currently because of that, I'm saying that because we are perfectly capable of happiness in life, that God, the most they can possibly prove from that line of argumentation is either that God is passive or he has better things to do. That's as far as you can go with that. Now this does mean that I do have to give some justification for evil with an all-good God. I'll give that a lash later. So what arguments am I actually going to talk about today? Later I'm going to talk to you about free will, but now I'm going to talk to you about like the known unknowns. I don't know if that's the right way of describing it. That's the way I describe it. So science bases its knowledge on like the observable world, and it changes its world view depending on new evidence emerging, and that's fine. But we're assuming that God exists. And if we assume that God exists in this debate, that means we have to assume all the caveats that being a God comes with it. I'm aware of this hand moving a lot. But you have to take in all the caveats, such as there being something more than this world, such as this plane of existence not being the only one. Now what does that mean? That means there might be something more. Now that something more could be an afterlife. That something more could be an alternate universe. Or that something more could just be that we're powering Rick's spaceship. Like, I don't really know. I'm really happy that you got that. I thought that was just going to get nothing. That's great. But yeah, so analysing God on a purely physical basis is insufficient because you're neglecting to engage with a large portion of what makes God God. It's like you're trying to measure pressure with a thermometer. That just doesn't work. So this is important for three reasons. Firstly, the proposition's frame of reference is too narrow. They need to engage on a spiritual basis to actually be able to come in close to proving something about God, because the spiritual basis is where God operates. Secondly, it means that this offers a possible justification for the suffering on earth. Now look, all natural disasters, death and terminal illnesses are heartbreaking, yet I cannot confidently assert that these things happen for no reason because I've only ever felt the physical consequences. This is exactly why the vaccine example is still relevant and applicable in this debate. And the third reason why this is important is because it means that we actually just don't have all the data. Like, we don't know the full story. So we cannot confidently assert anything. In college terms, it's as if you've done an exam, you're coming out of it, you're feeling devastated, and you're bitching that your lecturer has screwed you and therefore must be evil. But you don't actually know if he's failed or passed you yet. That is what we're talking about here. That's why I'm calling this the argument of known unknowns. It's not I don't know, therefore God. It's I don't know, therefore you guys don't know either, and you have to prove something in this debate. So that's why we're okay with that. Go ahead.
If you're saying that we don't have enough data to prove that God is evil, can you not also say that we don't have enough data to prove that God is good?
Yeah. I'm allowed to do that in this debate for the simple reason that we have to prove that God is evil. I'm happy to believe in a God that is not entirely evil, not entirely good. As Scott correctly brought up, God created everything. God created morals, therefore he defines what is moral and what is not moral. Like years ago, we used to think that killing animals was fine. Now we're all turning vegan. Morals are so that we can't define it. We cannot define it. So it turns out I'm happy to say that God may or may not be evil. I'm happy to say that there isn't that this is essentially a false dichotomy. I don't have to prove that he's entirely good. I just have to say that he's not entirely evil, or at least that they can't prove it. That's why that is still fine. So, still, standing up in this debate and saying who knows in like a fancy manner is like, it's a bit dumb. It's not a sexy argument. It's not really winning over crowd. So let's do this, ladies and gentlemen. If life was designed, why was it not designed to be perfect? I said earlier that an evil God will never allow any happiness, so why is the converse not true? It's because we're human, but most importantly, we're allowed to be human. We have our faults and our failings, but that allows us to define ourselves. If we live in a paradise, we would all be one. We would all have to be perfect, and perfection is singular. There is one thing to aspire to. There is one perfect. But seeing as we are human and we have our faults and defects, that allows us to define ourselves. It allows us to be good at what we're good at. Now, a lot of time, that's good and that's great. A lot of time, that means lots of evil things happen. Evils in this world are man-made. We created economics, and in doing so, we created poverty. We cut down forests, we scorched the earth. We created plantations, and in doing so, created slavery. All of these evils are the choice of men, and this would not happen in paradise. But in paradise, we don't exist because there can be no individuals, because we're in conflict with each other in paradise. This is why an all-good God can allow evil to happen. Because if he gave us a perfect life, he would not be able to let us live it ourselves. He would be essentially taking that life from us. He'd be tyrannical. God balances evil with the inherent good that is life. This answer is essentially what Cora is talking about when she says that some people are dicks, and that's terrible. This is why that happens, because if we do not have free will, we are not ourselves. We are not human. It is easy to curse the sky and demand for meaning to topple from the heavens. No, thank you. If God wanted us all to be in pain, we would be. If God wanted us all to be on our knees in prayer, we would be. But something more is being asked of us. We're being put here to do it ourselves. And that might not be happy enough for all of you, but God could be a tyrant. He could force us to abide by his laws, or he could give us paradise on demand. He's not doing either of those things. So maybe he's evil, or maybe he's all good, or maybe he doesn't even exist, and maybe that just doesn't matter, because you have a life, and your life is being defined by you. Your actions are what you will be remembered for. Evil cannot afford you to act autonomously, because when evil knows that when we act autonomously, we make medicine. Evil cannot afford us to have our own agency, because evil knows that we will fight his disease and we will try to make our lives worth living. Because our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond all measure. Our deepest fear is that we are in control. And that control is the opportunity which evil can never afford us. You are the person you choose to be. You're evil, and your success and your life is your own. If God was evil, not only would you not have the opportunity to control that life, you would not have it at all. So in the end, ladies and gentlemen, I do not know why diseases exist. I do not know why we point bombs at each other. I do not know why Freddos are 45 cents anymore. What I do know is that doesn't prove that God is evil. If God was evil and he could hear us, you can be damn sure that anyone who stood against him would get smited or smoked. Smitten? Smoked. Smoked. See, we bring grammar to all these things. Ladies and gentlemen, I also know if God was evil, you would have to listen to me speak all night. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I come here tonight to right a wrong that I committed a long time ago. When I was in first year, the LNH had this very motion as the freshers' debate, and I was speaking in the exact same position I'm in today. On the other side was a deeply Catholic young woman who I personally had invited in because I reckoned it'd be funny. She was a very American kind of Catholic, the kind who studied science but would interrupt a lecture to tell everyone that she didn't believe in evolution. The kind who vetoed a class night out in the George because she wouldn't go to that kind of bar. And of course, what she said in the freshers' debate was ridiculous, but none of us challenged her on her views because at the end of her speech she did a really cool backflip. And that made up for her being a bad person. That speaker's name, ladies and gentlemen, was Katie Ascot. And I think that debate was where she first learned that students would go along with all sorts of nonsense if it was packaged with a fun gimmick, be that gymnastics or being microwaves on campus. So, for my small part in causing this mess, sorry guys, whoops. And while by the looks of things, I don't think any of today's opposition can do backflips, it's still important to address what they've said, because if we don't, then we could end up with another Ascot fiasco on our hands. I'll start with what Jason said. Even though it wasn't a topic of debate, he did make gestures towards establishing that God exists. He said, you know, everything that exists must have a cause. The universe exists. The universe must have a cause. Something, God. I think Jason made a massive leap between, oh, something special must exist, and it might be kind of magical, to, it's God. Like, I think he needs a lot more work to actually convince us of anything there. He then tells us about cosmic coincidences. He tells us, well, you know, it looks unlikely that the universe should exist. But like, you know, at the risk of sounding facetious, like, define your probability space. Tell us how unlikely it is that the universe that the universe exists or doesn't, because I don't think that's actually a very well-defined question. And even then, if it is really unlikely, tell us how it's less likely than God existing, because, you know, some really unlikely things do happen. Like, everyone in this room is 1 in a million. We're all the lucky sperm in this room. Give yourselves a pat on the back. And then Scott tells us that, for him, believing in God was a decision from the heart. Like, I just feel like, you know, for me, religion is too important to be a decision from the heart. I think any decision worth more than €2 is probably something that you should use your head for first, and then maybe use your heart if it's a coin flip. I think when you talk about using your heart to make a decision like that, that's a decision that you keep making every day. You are sort of insinuating that you're suppressing your head the whole time you're making that decision with your heart. Like, there is a voice in your head that wants to weigh this up objectively, but your heart just keeps telling you no. I don't think that makes sense. And I wouldn't be happy trusting myself to make other decisions if I'd made a huge decision like that based on my heart and not based on evidence. And then quickly on to Kevin. He says the world can't be perfect with humans in it. Look, Kev, we're not asking for perfection. We think there are a few improvements that God could have made that no one would have had any problem with. Mosquitoes do not need to exist. Literally, nothing bad would happen if mosquitoes no longer existed. There are people who get cluster headaches every day. According to the people who get cluster headaches and have given childbirth, cluster headaches are worse than childbirth. They get that every day. Why did God make that happen? There is no reason, there's no explanation for that based on, you know, humans being evil. No, thank you. Well, why do I care about this debate? Because it obviously wouldn't affect my life if I were persuaded of the good character of a God I don't believe in. It would be of no more consequence to me than if I became convinced that Voldemort was actually a misunderstood civil rights activist. Standing up against the oppressors. No, I care about this debate because of what it means when your source of morality is someone who's evil by any human standard of the word. And that's what I'm appealing to. Our intuitive, common sense understanding of what evil is. Because I don't think it's actually more complicated than that. And the all-powerful God that we grew up with is intuitively evil. Because that's the word we'd use to describe anyone who deliberately inflicts the pointless suffering that God does. A world full of gratuitous pain. A world with hurricanes and malaria and people who put on Avicii at the sesh. That's not a world created by a nice person. Let's look at some of the reasons people give for God not being evil. One defense, which Jason and Kev use, is basically that God sometimes does good things, like he healed some of the people that he gave cancer to, or he once helped you find your amber leaf when you thought you lost it. I like to call this the OJ defense. Because OJ Simpson is also a nice person, according to those who spent time with him. He's very polite and helpful, and he's done a fair bit of charity work. But that doesn't undo all those other things he did. And to paraphrase Jason, if OJ was really evil, wouldn't he be a lot worse? I think OJ Simpson meets our definition of evil for the same reason that God does. A bad person who sometimes does good deeds is still a bad person. And at least there's a possibility that OJ might one day show remorse for what he's done. But our all-knowing, all-loving God doesn't make mistakes. And by the way, if you personally like to think of God as an imperfect being who's just doing their best, like some comic book hero, then that's fine, but that's no longer the God of the Christians or the Muslims or the Jews. So if you want some source material, you're either going to have to find a new religion on Wikipedia or start writing your own fan fiction. Go on, Kev.
So this is an issue of perspective. Do you give the example of cluster headaches? I don't really know yet. We're saying that those are evil, that some people have them, because we're used to not having them. If everybody had them, that wouldn't be the issue we complain about. We complain about something much, much worse. We have the life that we have now. That is why we're complaining about other things now.
Firstly, I think it was very inconsistent of God to create us so that we would intuitively think that the things God does was evil. I think he could have thought that one through a bit more, being all-knowing and stuff. Secondly, I can't remember what the second point was because I'm hungover. Another defense of God, which Jason also uses, is that all suffering is part of his vast eternal plan that we can't understand really, but it's a tremendous plan. And You've never seen anything like it before because God has the best plans. And like, yeah, you can't explain anything by saying it's part of God's secret plan. But you can explain anything by saying it's part of God's secret plan. But I don't see what that's meant to do for anyone. Like, whenever anything bad happens to me, I'm not sure how it's meant to comfort me that some weirdo far away has preordained this to happen as part of his grand scheme that I don't know about. It certainly didn't make the people in the Saw movies feel better that their pain was actually orchestrated by some psychopath who was getting off on watching them suffer. They say religion is supposed to offer some kind of meaning to life, but there's very little meaning in being told that the bizarre, chaotic universe we live in was actually designed by someone who knew what they were doing but whom we can never hope to understand. That doesn't explain anything about our lives. Being told that our pain was given to us by a mysterious sugar daddy just adds a layer of obfuscation. If life without God is absurdity, then life with God is just absurdity smothered in secret sauce. If you can swallow the stuff about God's plan, though, then it becomes much easier to accept anything that God tells you. If God tells you that gay people are sinners, or that contraception is the devil, then it's really not such a hard thing to believe when you've already accepted that the Lord, in his infinite wisdom, invented crab lice and had Noah put 2 of them on the boat. Sensitive subject for some people. But I think the best argument for God not being evil, which Kevin does bring up, is that God defines what evil is because he's literally God, and morality is what he says it is. And if God says he's not evil, then he can't be evil. And this is a pretty watertight argument. The only problem is, if you abandon your human moral intuition and just use God as your source of morality, then you open the door to justifying any atrocity as long as you can convince yourself that God endorses it. No. That said, I think most religious people most of the time don't look immediately to God for their morality. They just use their human intuition. I'd wager that's why, even though all the religions differ wildly in the sorts of gods they believe in, they differ much less in what they consider right and wrong. But the devil is in the edge cases, where people appeal directly to God-given moral codes. And this is a problem, because it's so easy to find God doing evil. You can exploit most holy books to persuade people into doing terribly inhumane things. Things that people would find intuitively abhorrent, be it persecuting those who are different from you, or going to war purely for the benefit of rulers who don't care about you. And throughout history, God has been a vehicle for some people to get away with terrible crimes. No, thank you. And I'm not saying you're evil if you believe in God. I'm not here because I care what you believe. But I am saying that the God most of us grew up with is a bad person by our own human standards. And the idea of God has allowed otherwise decent people to commit dreadful acts against one another. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something we should care about, no matter what we believe in. I'm proud to propose.
Lucy to conclude the meeting.
Hello, and I'd like to thank everyone here for attending on this very interesting and, quite lively and contentious debate, to say the least. Now, many people have seen catastrophes around the world which cause them to doubt. Hurricane Irma, wars, famines, the election of Donald Trump. The Ryanair mass cancellations was the worst. But we have to look deeper into and see the bigger picture. Now, first of all, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, you talk against God being evil, but aren't you part of a civilization that was spread by the sword, subjecting peoples around the world, imposing their beliefs and values on everybody? Well, to you I say this, look, I'm not here to defend the British Empire. Now, we have to ask this question, is God evil? But we also have to ask, what is your belief regarding God in the first place, before we even answer this question? See, if you're an atheist, we have to ask, what understanding of God are you claiming is evil? What evidence are you going to advance? Christian understanding, Muslim understanding, Jewish understanding, the Mormon understanding? Which understanding in particular? Are you an atheist against the Muslim understanding or the Christian understanding? It reminds me of a friend of mine who was a convert to Islam. He was from Northern Ireland. He converted to Islam, and people asked him, are you Protestant or Catholic, in that kind of shibboleth way to determine which allegiance you have. And he said, no, I've become Muslim. I said, okay, but are you a Protestant Muslim? Now, if you are an atheist, you would have to abstain. You have to vote in abstentionist motion because you don't believe God exists. And like the first speaker pointed out, he argued that there was equal evidence to show God is both good, all good and all evil, or at least good or all evil. So there's equal evidence. Well, there's even more reason why you have to abstain, because you can't argue any one way. If you're a deist and you believe God is not omniscient, then he makes the universe but doesn't really care about it or has no power to affect it afterwards, then you too also have to abstain. If you believe in Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft, you too also have to abstain, because the god in the Cthulhu mythos is not Cthulhu, it's Azathoth, who creates universes blindly, doesn't know what it's doing, so it's not evil. So even Cthulhuites have to abstain. So then my real question is really, or rather, where I'd like to take this argument is, what should people who are theists believe? Where should they vote? Well, let's really look at the question. I don't really have to refute the proposition by showing that God is good. I merely have to show that God is not evil. And we look at it, pleasure and pain. We are arguing as to, does God support pleasure or unlimited pleasure, or does he support unlimited pain? And this is where our debate lies. I actually say it's a false dichotomy. You see, you eat to live. You don't live to eat. Pain and pleasure serve a purpose, a motivational purpose in all living creatures. You are averse to pain and you seek pleasure. That actually serves a higher purpose than just itself. It's not an end in itself. And this is where we're mistakenly having this debate. Furthermore, if you believe in an omnipotent God who doesn't need anything, why does he, or it if you prefer, for the feminists in the audience, why would, whatever, why would God want suffering? God doesn't get benefit from suffering. It doesn't increase the sustenance, because God is meant to be omnipotent and without independent, doesn't require anything. So what benefit does he get from suffering? And we can all agree that God created life, a life that has consciousness, that survives, that reproduces, that develops, and a diversity of life in all kinds of different forms from what we can observe on the earth. This is what we can observe, and this is what we can agree on. So yes, you might point to individual cases, or even mass sections of cases where there's been deaths or killings or suffering, but on aggregate, life survives. Life perseveres, life develops. And even in those cases of suffering, it is still part or parcel of life. But more importantly, I want to mention something more special than life, consciousness, which is quite interesting. You see, if God was an evil God, why not just leave a barren void? Why create life in the first place with consciousness? Now, I'm not going to answer the purpose of life in this discussion because time is ticking. However, what I will say is that consciousness proves one thing, in fact the only thing that it can prove, is that whatever God intended for us, he intended for us to bear witness to it. That's the purpose of consciousness. And pain and pleasure are part of that experience. It's not an end in itself. That's the mistake we've been making all along. I'd also say that to say God is evil makes the mistake of anthropomorphization and anthropocentrism. We believe that the whole universe has to conform to our standards, to our criteria. Like God is some cosmic wish genie that grants you wishes, or is Santa. Sorry?
What other metric of evil do you suppose we use?
Exactly. What metric of evil exists? How do you metricize evil or good? That's a question that even, again, would lead an atheist to vote in abstention, because what is evil or good apart from subjectively what you view as your self-interest? But I'll say this, I don't think God is a cosmic wish genie, which is why we shouldn't be disappointed if he doesn't answer each and every single one of our Christmas wish list. Also, we shouldn't view him as some external interloper that interferes in our life and is telling us what to do when his presence sustains the very subatomic particles that form the structure of our bodies. Our very existence, if you're a theist, is constantly sustained by God. So he's not detached from you or someone that makes demands of you without any reason to. You actually depend on him in the most fundamental sense. So kind of I reiterate, if you are an atheist, you can only vote in an abstention of this by the admission, in a way, of the arguments used by the proposition. Likewise, if you are a deist or a Cthulhu worshipper. However, if you are a theist, you can only vote that God, whatever he is and whatever he intends for us and whatever conscience proves, it certainly proves that he's not evil. And maybe as a last point, as a very last point, I have the most definitive argument that God isn't evil. You see, we're all gathered here today to debate and question, and some even have mocked the concept of God, claiming he's evil, and yet, after this debate, there will be pizza and drink for everyone. Surely God is good.
So before we move on to the question and answers, I'm just going to pause for a second, and can we just give a round of applause to all the speakers? So just briefly, the structure of what happens next. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. We probably have time for 5 or 6 questions. I'm afraid the debate is meant, but hopefully you'll get to chat to people afterwards if you have any more questions, and come back and ask more questions in the future for the rest of our debate. When you ask a question, you can address it to a side, or you can address it to a speaker. If you address it to a side, people on the side can choose who wants to answer it. They have a minute to answer your question, and the other side can respond. So they have a minute to answer your question, and then we'll move on to the next question. Is that clear enough? Yeah, cool. Okay, so does anyone have any question? Yeah, on the balcony.
It was mentioned, I think, 3 or more times, the idea that we don't know what good and evil are without God, and there were a few good examples that were given, like veganism, for example, that there'd be a pretty sharp divide in this room if we took a poll on who thinks it's wrong to eat animals. It seems also that in our society we tend to take a kind of democratic approach and make it a preferential thing. So what would the majority like to consider good or evil? So for example, a couple of years ago we had the marriage equality referendum, now there's announced it's going to be an abortion referendum, and so on and so forth. So if we're treating morality as though it's purely, the whim of the majority, then on what grounds are we saying that things are actually objectively evil or not evil? So is it just that, oh well, we don't happen to like this, so we better say that God is evil, or do you have an actual kind of more definable or measurable metric of things that are good and evil that would exist external to an authority, an all-knowing authority that would tell us? Like, how do you say that evil and good exist in the absence of God, such that you can measure up God next to it?
Yes, so debate to begin with, I think we had a good definition that is purely of human origin in terms of good being defined in relation to the promotion of well-being. But I think what you're touching on is actually the Euthyphro paradox. So if you describe good and evil as concepts that are independent of God, then what do you need God for?
But I'm asking, on what grounds do you do that? Like, on what grounds do you say these things exist other than what God tells us?
So exactly, we're here on this planet all ourselves. There's not going to come anyone out of the sky and explain what good or bad are for us. So we have to figure out ourselves the best way to live together, using reciprocity, using empathy, using all of the facilities that we have evolved to understand what's the best way for us all to live here on the planet together. And so that's very much a challenge that people have to answer.
So
I'm
is
gonna
it
let, sorry, I'm
arbitrary
just gonna,
then?
because
So-
yeah, I'm just gonna let you can continue that after it's gone, but I'm just gonna let the opposition
So-
respond.
This is kind of what I was talking about. Kind of what like everyone's kind of. You have to say choose anyway. Yes, this is kind of what I was talking about in terms of like what we're talking about like what is evil and all that. And the answer we're being given for evil is on a purely physical, material basis, the things that we're feeling now. But God, by definition, and because for all things earlier said, smarter than I could, by definition, we can't purely say physically and materialistically that that's how we judge God. If this was a debate about whether God exists or not, like I'd have a different answer. But seeing as we're asking if he's evil or not, if he exists, therefore we have to take in other things. Therefore, the suffering that they talk about on earth is not the only piece of data that we can look at. And seeing as we can't see everything, it's essentially inclusive. Okay.
I like it in there as well. We already know what good is, though. Like, you can see what good is, but what do we mean when we call anything good? Like, say, spaghetti bolognese, for example. What is good spaghetti bolognese? That references to an idea of what it should be, or what a perfect bolognese would be. I think it sounds great, doesn't it? And like, a good bolognese would, like, fill us up, or, like, be tasty, or be, like, cheap to make, or whatever. So, like, goodness is an objective thing. You can say, you can have an objective idea of goodness by saying that it's, like, the level of perfection in a thing, depending on whatever thing it is. That depends on what, you know, like a perfect for a car will be different what's perfect for bolognese. But that is actually like a good objective measure of what is good or bad. And you look at what the nature of the thing is itself you're talking about. So like morality has to be objective anyway, because you know most of us would say like even if everyone in the world thought that, for example, something like I don't know, if everyone in the world thought that murder was okay, it would still be not okay, wouldn't it? So clearly, like there is some, we all kind of instinctively know that there is some kind of objective morality that we can appeal to, and the question is then, like, you know, we can use our reason to kind of like try and figure that out and decipher it already. But there is like a definition of good, and I think evil is simply a lacking of good.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, that's great. Sorry. I'm just trying to answer, so that's alright, just so we can make sure we get as many questions as we can. Yeah, open this up for you.
This is more directed towards the last speaker, but I think it was mentioned across the night that suffering brought on by life in general is seen as a motivator to like better yourself. In some countries, some civilizations, suffering, some people cannot bring themselves out of suffering. They don't have like monetary aspects. Some people don't understand how to bring themselves out of suffering. So why would a God misplace suffering on people who cannot themselves bring themselves out of suffering into like a better way of life?
To kind of clarify what I said and reiterate it, I said that there's actually something higher than just pleasure and suffering, which is consciousness and in essence bearing witness. I mean, the universe, from what we can see anyway, is mostly inanimate. At least what we can observe is mostly inanimate. The universe is generally inanimate. But you have these parts of the universe which are conscious and can actually observe itself and observe it living and changing and coming to an end, which is all things change in the universe. So my point is that if you don't want to invest in any particular religion, the minimum at least you could say is that whatever God requires of us, he wants us to bear witness to his creation. That's a higher goal than just pain and suffering, which is why I said this false dichotomy. We keep talking about pain and suffering, and I say that these point to something much more higher than that. I said we eat to live, not live to eat.
The other thing I would say is that, like, yeah, I can agree that there probably is a higher reason than pain and pleasure, but the only thing we actually experience now is the good and evil that we define as humans. The only thing we actually know is evil in any sense is the human word of evil, so therefore we can't really have this debate on whether he's evil in a spiritual term or not, because none of us have experienced it. Like, it doesn't really make sense.
But you know what's interesting is, okay, I said not to investigate a particular religion. However, most or many religions believe in a settling of accounts in another reality that comes after this, subsequent hereafter, whatever you want to call it, whereby humans specifically are subject to justice. Those who were poor will not be as humble in hereafter, and those who were rich and haughty will be very humble in hereafter, wouldn't mildly or whatever. So, in essence, ours not to believe in any particular religion, but there are, should we say, understandings of God, where there is an account for the human experience of good and evil.
Sorry, just for the opposition, a lot of this debate came up with that, oh, God might have a secret plan, or his morality, since he's all man, is divorced from human morality. But if you use the same argument for someone who commits genocide and you say, oh, well, they have their own morality, or they have their own plans, or they think what they're doing is necessary, we can all still agree that's objectively abhorrent. So whatever his frame of reference, we can only operate on our own.
So what you're basically saying is that we can say that God is doing something for a good reason, but the thing in itself, suffering itself is still an evil, it's still a bad thing. And you're right. Like, I'll use the chemotherapy example again. Like, when someone is treated with chemotherapy to cure them of cancer, that's literally poison. That's being put into them, you know? That's still, it doesn't make the poison any less poison, but the fact that it's being used in such a way that can bring out a better result than there was beforehand. So the main, like, I suppose my response to that would be like, if someone could have mass genocide and say they had a secret plan, well, that's a person, you know. We can kind of like, we can fully comprehend it and fully see what the results of their actions are. But the fact that we're talking about God, you have to necessarily say that it's someone that's infinitely powerful and infinitely knowing. So, like, first you have to admit he has the ability to bring some goodness out of any suffering, because he's all powerful. And I guess also even if you can't like see that yourself, if you look at the idea of God being all powerful and being all good, you say, well, there must be some explanation, even if we don't know it. And it's not unreasonable to say that there could be an explanation that we don't know, because it would be beyond us, because we're finite creatures and God is necessarily be infinite. Another aspect that no one's really brought up is that if you do accept God, sorry, I'll do that story. If you do accept God, then you do accept an afterlife as well. So you have to include in the picture the idea that someone, even for all their suffering in life, even if that doesn't help them at all in life, they will be like infinitely rewarded and with perfect happiness for eternity afterwards. So that's something that's quite awfully brought into the picture, and maybe it would change how you would look at some of these situations.
I'm just going to let sorry, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yes, so to answer the question directly, I think the standard that the opposition has created is to initially assume that God must be all-powerful, and then to further assume that if God is all-powerful and evil, the world must be perfectly evil. But the initial assumption is just fallacious. There's no reason to believe that God is all-powerful. God could be evil, but just a bit shit on it. In fact, there's plenty of evidence that whatever God's aiming at, he's a bit shit on it, because as the physicists might say, the entropy in this place isn't what it used to be. Things are getting messier and messier all the time. So whatever God's aiming at, he's a bit shit on it. And I think there's plenty more evidence to say he's a bit shit at being evil than a bit shit at being good.
Yes,
if I may quote a parable that might be resonant with students. You're comparing a fellow creature doing oppression to his other creatures who are like him, and the one who sustains humanity in the first place. It's like a student complaining that their parents cut off their money supply to them that supports them throughout their university years, but the parents have in fact stolen from that student, even though it's the parents' money and the parents don't have to give it to the student, and the parents are within full rights to cut off that money supply to their students. I probably turn everything here against me now with that parable, but that is, in essence, you're not comparing like for like, and you forget that we depend on God's constant sustenance to actually continue to exist. So.
Does anyone have a question for the proposition?
Yes. This is just asking last person who was talking last night, you called God a being. I just want to know what you actually, like, what's your perspective?
Sorry, are you asking if I believe in God? Or?
No, it's just that when you're speaking, called a being.
Yeah. What? Yeah.
Okay, so you think, I'm just curious, is it human or?
I mean, I don't think the question is well posed, given that I don't believe in God, but I think the God that I was talking about in my speech was the God that most of us grew up with, who is not human. He's the God of the Bible and the Quran, and I think they're the same. They're the same thing.
gave answers to all of these things. But my question is why these things happen towards particular groups and in particular areas. So like all of the like major natural disasters, like the droughts and like the lack of food is all in like India and Africa, and all of like attraction is towards people of colour. So it's not racist.
That again is so that's the idea that people have consciousness, they have free will, they're allowed to do what they want. Yeah, I'll get that. So that means that first off, on the racism thing, like blame Britain, blame France, blame Germany, like those are those people who did that. On the natural disasters thing, we're on a sphere going down the sun, so there's just more heat there, so more things happen essentially.
But he created it.
But yeah. But that's how the universe like came out. That's just like the world that we were given. It didn't like the fact that it isn't perfect is again a matter of perspective. Like it could be God's all powerful in some way.
It's been historically kind of very short-sighted because India for 1,000 years hasn't always been in famine. It was actually had some amazing flowering of civilization when you saw famines in Western Europe. In fact, so many plagues and famine problems in Western Europe, you would have thought that Western Europe was the third world, a couple of centuries ago. And people said, oh, why does God hate Western Europe? Why does God hate white people? Or something like this, right? But it would be wrong to ask that because everywhere around the world you've seen empires grow and fall and people become successful and then fall into ruin. It's a cyclical nature. And studying the cycle of civilizations is, in fact, maybe something that would help us understand more about what God is trying to show us by lesson of the cyclical nature of all things.
I'm going to answer that question very quickly. The God of Moses explicitly talked about having a chosen people. That sounds a little bit racist to me. How could it be anything but racist? And I have to come to the defense of my colleague when he says that the God of Islam and Christianity is the same God. Well, actually, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all share the God of Abraham, so I'm not sure why that got the reaction it did, but that's entirely sensible to me.
One last question and look to the proposition if that's okay, just for sake of balance. Yeah, in the back. Yeah.
Okay, so we've had a lot of argument about people dying or children dying or again the suffering. For every one person, for every one child that has died tragically or has suffered, how many more or less people have grown a full beautiful life?
Probably not that many.
Can I?
You know what you know, and so I think that that's the argument that someone somewhere for one part of their day or one portion of their life or at all has suffered or is
So
suffering.
can't people grow and...
Is an evil God. I think that that's your argument is saying that you could prove that there's a God who's maybe doing his best and failing in many cases.
Well, I think if you're talking about a God for whom the words doing his best makes sense, then yeah, it isn't the God we spend most of our time talking about it. Like it's, something more like Superman who can't save everyone. But I think the God that most of the people in this room are thinking of when they came here was the God who has the power to save everyone and has no such thing as doing his best because he can do anything.
Right, but I'm asking you for making the argument for a God who is evil.
Yes, I think I would readily accept that there are some good things in the world, but I would suggest that argument is similar to the burglar who turns up in court and says, but Your Honour, what about all the houses that didn't burgle? So I have 4 kids. If I murdered 2 of them and explained to my wife that there's just as many alive as there are dead, I suspect she wouldn't be too impressed.
Topic. fiasco and that stuff.
If I get what you're saying correctly, you're saying that he does some evil things, he does some good things. That doesn't excuse the evil things, even if there's like a bit of both of them. You know, he's all powerful. He should be able to do only good things. Well, I kind of continue that to say, well, if he was all powerful, surely then doesn't that include the ability to actually, something that from our point of view appears to be, yeah, well, we're talking about God here, so necessarily he would be all powerful. He doesn't accept that idea in the first place. We can talk about his existence separately. But if we do talk about a God, it's generally accepted assumption that he is all powerful. And if he is all powerful, then surely he can also bring actually goodness, like he can redeem suffering, which in itself is a bad thing. He brings something better out of it than there was beforehand.
But why would a child have to suffer in order for God?
Exactly. Well, so yeah, exactly. Well, if anyone can make
over here.
So if it was ever possible for something that we conceive that truly that is so evil, if it was possible at all for that to end up being brought to a good, to that be made into a good thing rather than a bad thing, that would have to be God. Like, how could anyone less than God, anyone less than an all-powerful being, bring something good out of something so terrible? So we're talking about God in the first place. We don't necessarily say that he has the ability to do that. And if we're going to be talking about an afterlife as well, like those children, people who are suffering are nearest to God because God suffered. That's what we believe anyway. So you have to include in your assumption as well that those children are happy forever in heaven as well. So it kind of doesn't really. Your assumptions also include some further.
Very quick response to that. Your analogy of a burglar going to court and you want to look at all the houses I didn't burgle, it's actually incorrect. You see, because God only contributing, the real response would be actually the house I burgled is my own, and look at all the houses I built. That would be the actual fact.
To approach speakers, ask questions at the debate. That is all the time for Q&A. Just before you go, sorry, we're going to have a vote. Before you do, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about some of the things we have coming up in the LMH, just really briefly. So, Maidens is the competition we hold. We've never done university debating before. That is taking place. Sign-ups are on our Facebook page at the moment. They're also on the LOSOC Facebook page. Anyone who's interested in trying out debating, we have so many engaged members of the audience tonight. Anyone who knows other people, please pass on the word. Please do get involved. It's a great experience. It's a great competition. It's not intimidating. All of the people are in the same boat as you, and we really recommend you try it out. We also have a sign-up sheet for external competitions. Anyone who'd like to debate with us and travel abroad debating with us, we have sign-up sheets for that, so you can show your expression of interest. That's also on our Facebook page. We're sending people to Edinburgh, to Oxford, to Cambridge, and we're sending people to Durham. So have a look at that, think about it, do fill it out if you're interested. Also keep an eye out for our Freshers Rep and Committee positions, which we'll be talking about in the next few House debates. We're looking for people to get more involved in the LMH, so if you think that fits your bill, get in touch with us, come along to our future House debates. Next Wednesday our House debate is This House Would Hit It and Quit It, a debate about hookup culture. It's going to be a good one. We'd love to see you there. Do come along, it's always a good time. Bring your friends and do like the page, get in touch, whatever it is. We keep all of our members updated through Facebook, through emails, all the rest of that stuff. Thank you so much for coming. Before we leave, sorry, there's pizza on our side. All of those in favour of the motion, this House believes God is evil, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those against the motion, raise your hand and say nay.